Okay, Paul, you and I have been talking for a while, and when we set up this interview, I had no clue that you would eventually right now be on your farewell tour of UniWatch.com. So explain what's happening for everybody.
So I started writing about uniforms. My first Uni Watch column was on May 26th, 1999, and we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of that. And the 25th anniversary, or the Universary, if you want to call it that, is also going to be my last day. I've decided that a quarter century of covering this beat is enough. I've said most of what I needed to say. I feel like I've learned I'm not really learning new things anymore. I'm kind of learning the same things over and over. And honestly, it's a really fast moving beat. That's exciting and exhilarating as a beat reporter, but it also can be exhausting. And I kind of need to get off the hamster wheel and kind of write about other things, be able to focus on other things, and not have UniWatch be the tail that wags the dog of my life to the extent that it currently does.
It means I was living in the college dorms when you started UniWatch. Just saying, not to make either of us feel old here, but like 20.
That's the other thing. I don't mind saying it. I just turned 60.
Yeah.
And so I was like, do I want to be writing about uniforms in my 60s? And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but I decided it's not what I want for the next phase of my life.
Yeah, well, you can say that confidently because you don't look 60. So there you go.
I've always been told I look younger than I am, and I've finally reached the point in my life where that's a good thing.
25 years of running a website. I don't know that anybody sets out and expects, oh, this is going to go on for multiple decades. But what actually got you into this fascination of, it's not just uniforms, it's logos. It was probably branding before branding was really a thing. So what got you into this?
I had spent most of the 90s writing about consumer culture, mostly in terms of really small details. Picky little details. It was something that it was a fascination with what I call the inconspicuous. And I approached that mostly for business magazines and for some design magazines. And so that included writing a lot about logo design, package design, product design, industrial design. And I realized at some point along the line that I could take that same filter and apply it to sports. And I realized that I had internalized a lot of knowledge and a lot of opinions, frankly, about sports graphics and about uniforms. I had always been kind of a uniform geek. When I got my first Little League uniform when I was 8 or 9 years old, I was really excited about the uniform, and I was really excited to have those stirrups pulled up just right. I was that kid in junior high who was doodling team logos in the margins of my notebook instead of paying attention to the teacher. And so this was always something I was interested in. It had never really occurred to me until the late 90s that I could write about it. And then I thought, nobody's really done this from a sports writing perspective. What if I created a column for it? And so it wasn't actually a website at first. It was a column that ran in the Village Voice, which was an alt weekly newspaper here in New York City where I live. Then a few years later, it briefly moved to slate.com, and Slate still exists, of course, and the pieces I did for them are still archived there. And then really the big break was when ESPN.com was interested in what I was doing, and I moved to ESPN, and I covered the uniform beat for them for 15 years. And while I was doing that, I also launched the daily UniWatch blog. And the idea of the daily blog was that it was supposed to supplement the ESPN column. I would do big features for ESPN, smaller, more granular stuff on the blog. And I mean, I was really lucky that ESPN allowed me to do that, and they encouraged me even. And then in 2019, ESPN let me go, and the blog sort of became my life raft. I had a way to communicate with my audience, and it's now sort of my base of operations, at least for 3 more weeks.
There you go. Well, it's amazing that your work started out being viewed on a 56K modem by most people, and now now it's on the phone. The landscape has changed, but the opportunity of the internet it's always been amazing.
I don't think UniWatch could have worked as well in the pre-internet era, because it's about visuals, right? It's about design. And so writing for the internet, you don't just have to put a sentence in there. You can link to a photo. You can not just tell the reader, you can show the reader.
Right.
And so UniWatch was really an excellent project for the internet. I didn't conceive of it that way when I started it. Again, I did it for an alt weekly newspaper, but it turned out to be a really good time to start this kind of project just as internet publishing was becoming a thing.
You said recently that this latest MLB Nike Fanatics jersey saga, debacle, whatever we want to call it, is maybe the biggest story that you and your site have covered over the years. So we can maybe discuss that in detail in a second. But can you quickly just run me through the other top stories, the top headlines over 25 years, maybe the things that have stood out or resonated the most? And they don't have to go in detail, but what are those other things?
The programs that the uniform programs that the leagues have put out, like the City Connect program, the Color Rush program in the NFL, the Reverse Retro program in the NHL. Those are all big stories. Whenever there's like a typo or a misspelling on a jersey, I remember when the Washington Nationals sent two players out on the field wearing Nationals. The O was missing. That was a big story. Sometimes a big story can be something that just sort of captures people's imagination. When I was at ESPN, I forget who came up with the idea. It was not my idea, but somebody said, I wonder which Yankee has worn the most pinstripes, like the largest jersey with the most, like literally the largest number of pinstripes across the jersey. And I ended up like squinting at more photos than I really want to think about, like trying to count the pinstripes. I ended up talking with people at the Baseball Hall of Fame because they were able to confirm that the spacing between the Yankees pinstripes had changed over the years. So the count could sort of be different for different players in different eras. And that did a tremendous amount of traffic, that story for ESPN, and it was just fun.
Yeah.
It wasn't, like news, but it was just a really fun Uni Watch story. And a lot of the best Uni Watch stories have been ones like that.
Well, let's dive into the controversy. Nike, Major League Baseball, Fanatics, and what's happened in the last several months. I mean, it's almost hard to believe that giants in the industry, like Nike, I mean, they've been making products for decades now. Major League Baseball should know its own people by now. And I know Fanatics is new to this, and maybe they're the least responsible, but you've got three huge entities, and somehow, some way, they got this so wrong that not just one or two people or fans or players were complaining about it. It's on a mass scale. How in reverse did they get this so wrong?
I should say Fanatics isn't really new to this. They have been producing at that same factory in Pennsylvania, which they now own. But that used to be the Majestic factory.
Right.
And Fanatics bought Majestic in 2017. Though that same facility with that same equipment and that same staff with those same people have been producing Major League Baseball's on-field uniforms, including the ones with the Nike emblem. The last 4 years. They've been producing all baseball uniforms for about 20 years. And so they're not really new to this, but they were given a set of design specs from Nike saying, start using this fabric instead of the old fabric, start cutting it to these specs, not the old specs, change the lettering size, all of that. And I think we see in a lot of Nike's designs, their individual team designs, a lot of times it feels like change for the sake of change, or trying to be different for the sake of being different. And I think in this case, instead of doing that on a team level, they did it for all of Major League Baseball. It's not so unusual for a league to come out with a new tailoring template or new fabric. We see it in the NFL all the time. Nike has produced the NFL uniform since 2012. At that time, in 2012, they introduced new fabric, new tailoring, different seam placement and all of that. And they've done that 2 more times since then. And those have gone like relatively simply. But the baseball one has been more problematic. I think one reason is baseball always, you have the gray on gray uniforms. And one of the problems, and really to me, the most inexcusable one, is like, come on, man, can't you get the gray jersey to match the gray pants? That should not be that hard. But I think really a big part of the problem is Nike is always so obsessed with performance. They'll tell you that their belt buckle is now engineered from aviation grade aluminum that's like half an ounce lighter than the old belt buckle. And like, okay, it's great that you sweat those details,
right,
but there are other details that like if a baseball if the name on the back of his jersey is made from smaller letters, which is lighter and uses less fabric, and if it's half an ounce lighter, is that really going to change his performance? And you have to remember, and I think Nike didn't really think this part through, baseball is not like basketball. It's not like football.
Correct.
It's not like hockey. It's not like soccer. Mostly, you just stand there. Baseball, like if you're a left fielder, you mostly just stand there for most of the game. Yeah. And in between innings, you just sit there.
Right.
And so does it matter? Like, do I think performance is improved with today's lightweight, moisture wicking fabrics as opposed to like the heavy wool flannels of 50 years ago? Yes, I do. But do I think like saving half an ounce in weight from making the lettering of the player's name smaller on the back of the jersey makes a difference? No, I don't. And I think that's really something that they didn't think through properly. And in fact, I mean, think about it logically. The Yankees have never had player names on the back of their jerseys. Has that given them a performance advantage over every other team for generations? Is that what we attribute the Yankees' success to over the years?
Right.
Because they don't have. I mean, it's just absurd on its face.
That's such a great point.
I think Nike's obsession with, we do player mapping, we do body scans, digital body scans, and all this stuff. And but at the end, except for pitchers, like most baseball players just stand there.
Yeah.
And so they just want something that fits, that isn't too heavy, it's fine. But and shaving an ounce here or an ounce there at the expense of legibility, at the expense of what fans have come to expect in terms of a quality, feeling, and looking garment, I think was really, really misguided.
The only pushback I'll say is I've never wanted to be a catcher in the summer sun and heat, but that is the only exception. To your point, I don't know that baseball has been clamoring for performance wear. So as we digest all the different things and all the different complaints, the small letters on the back, the transparent pants, the fact that Riley Green's pants keep ripping, I mean, not just once, but like 2 or 3 times now, the fact that there's no more embroidery on the patches anymore. For you, of all the little small details, what's the most offending part? Like, what's the one thing of these new jerseys? And I know they're getting fixed, and I do want to talk about the remedies in a second, but what was the one thing that stood out to you and said, no, this ain't it?
It was a few things. I mean, I know you wanted me to choose one, but honestly, it's hard. There were so many things that all looked like a cheap stadium giveaway jersey.
Yeah.
One was the smaller lettering on the back. Another, I mean, you talk about the embroidered patches. The truth is, unless you're up close looking at it, you can't tell the difference. On TV, if you're watching a game, you cannot tell the difference.
But if you buy one, like you want to know, feel
honestly,
it.
I don't care so much about that aspect of it. I care how it looks when I'm watching a game. But one aspect that hasn't been talked about as much, but to me, again, looks sort of rinky-dink, is what we at Uni Watch call the head spoon, which is the piping that comes up the center of the jersey and goes around the collar. Not for every team, but for teams that have that. We call it the head spoon.
I get it.
Sort of like the handle and then the spoon that goes around the collar. Those lines of piping are closer together this year, and it just looks looks rinky-dink. It looks like a knockoff. It doesn't look as legit. Meanwhile, players are actually getting, and this goes with the smaller lettering too. Players are getting bigger. Most of them are wearing their jerseys baggier, right? Like more loose fitting. That is like a trend we see, not just, this year, but over time. And so you've got this broader canvas and you're making things smaller and narrower, and it just accentuates how rinky-dink it looks. So I think that those are both really bad. Moving the MLB logo on the back of the rear collar, moving it down, it just doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't look rinky-dink necessarily, but it just looks off. Like there's too much space above it, and it just doesn't look properly positioned.
I always say it's like television production, which I'm very familiar with. Sometimes if the camera settings aren't right and the color's off or the audio doesn't sound right, the viewer at home doesn't specifically know what's wrong, but they look at it and say, something's not right here. And I think that's the same with all of us watching baseball. And we're not tailors. I'm not. I don't know if you are. You have a lot more background in this. But I look at it and say, even when I was at spring training and felt these, I can't really put into words about the stitching or the fabrication or construction, but something just feels off. And so we'll turn it forward here and say that Nike has come out. Actually, the Players Association has come out to say, hey, guys, we've fixed this for you. We're going to change all of this. It may not happen until the beginning of next season at the latest. Do you think that this all actually just gets resolved and they revert back to the ways? And it's amazing because, as you mentioned, Nike and Fanatics were making the old Majestic jerseys for 4 years and nobody said a peep. They thought they were great. Do they just revert back to what they were doing and the problem's fixed and it's like it never happened?
There are so many unanswered questions about this situation, and that is the biggest one. There were already unanswered questions about why did they do some of these
Yeah.
changes? Why did they move the MLB logo down? Why did they make the head spoon piping closer together? Those questions have not really been addressed. But the biggest question now is we've been told they're going to address certain things, but does that mean they're just going to put the larger lettering on the existing new
Right.
fabric? Or are
Right.
they going back to the old fabric, the old tailoring? They haven't really said that or even acknowledged that those questions exist. And honestly, I'm not sure they know the answer to those questions yet. Because it seems pretty clear from a follow-up statement. You mentioned the union put out a memo, but then Major League Baseball put out a statement last Friday
Hmm.
and saying they stopped saying that these changes will be made by 2025 at the latest. They just said
Oh.
in 2025. So it seems that most of the changes will happen for the start of next season, except they did say the mismatched grays. And it was funny the language they used. They said slight variations in color that a few teams have experienced. They really tried to minimize it and kind of make it sound like anybody who noticed this was just nitpicking. And, meanwhile, while I'm sitting here talking to you, there are fans like emailing me and tweeting things at me like all day long about this kind of stuff. But they did say that the mismatched shades of gray on the road gray uniforms could be addressed as soon as the second part of this season. So hopefully after the All-Star break, that issue will be resolved. We'll see. They didn't say, does that mean they're going back to the old gray fabric
Right.
or they're making a change to the existing new gray? We're still going to find out how that plays out.
Well, the pipeline is difficult. I've talked to, people who work in this industry of equipment managing for Major League Baseball teams, and, they make their orders for spring training in the fall of the year before. So there is a delay to this process. And if they're going to stop the presses, so to speak, I mean, it is going to take months and months for teams to ultimately get these new jerseys. So I'm not surprised. Go ahead.
It does take a while. I mean, you're talking about just getting it done for the players.
Right.
But the real problem is that they've painted themselves into a corner because of all the retail activity.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense that they're not going to change the size of the lettering on the back of the jersey until next season. Because if they did do it this season, then what about all their retail partners who are stuck with tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of jerseys that A, no longer match what the players will be wearing on the field, and B, the reason they don't match what the players are wearing on the field is that everybody said, oh, the smaller lettering stinks.
Right.
So as a retailer, you're there with this inauthentic and disliked and basically yanked from on field inventory. And what do you do with all that inventory? And so, I mean, that's a real problem with jersey retailing, is that it drives and sort of determines the schedule of what we see on the field.
I know who I'm talking to here, so I know why you're, knee deep into all this stuff. But, I've also seen quite a bit of response from fans who are upset by this story. Certainly the players wouldn't speak out unless it really was a problem. I know there are some out there who say, guys, we're just talking about sports uniforms. It's not that big a deal. I can't really tell as I watch on TV. I think in this case, and this is kind of my final thought on it, there is a reason for people to notice this and maybe not be thrilled with it and say some things about this. And there should be a little bit of course reversal and maybe even an apology eventually for getting this wrong. I mean, it's not life and death, but it's also noticeable.
Mm-hmm. I think the union memo really put it perfectly. They said Nike was re-innovating something that didn't need to be innovated, or as I like to say, it wasn't broke, but they fixed it anyway. and that's, I think a lot of times with uniforms, I don't mean to put uniforms on the same level as medicine or being a doctor, but that phrase, first, do no harm,
Right.
They should think about that whenever you're redesigning a uniform. And when people say, it's not that important, it's just a uniform. Of course, it's not life and death. It's not world peace. It's not, famine or hunger or anything like that. But the reason I've been able to write about this stuff for so long, and the reason people care about it so much, is that rooting for a team is this completely irrational form of devotion. Jerry Seinfeld calls it rooting for laundry, right? That's like the famous phrase. But If you think of it, you mentioned branding earlier. If you think in terms of brand loyalty, usually if you're loyal to a brand, that means you're loyal to the product. Like I like Cheerios. I have Cheerios for breakfast every morning. I do like the yellow box and the logo and all of that. It's familiar to me. But what I really like is the way that Cheerios taste. And if they changed the taste or if it got soggier in milk or something, my loyalty to the yellow box would only go so far. But with sports, the quality of the product and the content of the product, which is the players, is changing all the time because the players get traded, they get injured, they retire, free agency, all of this. So your team can be really good one year and really bad the next year. But we remain loyal to that logo, to those team colors, and to the uniform, no matter who's wearing it. And that is a really intense and frankly, completely irrational form of brand loyalty. And that is the power of a uniform. And that's why people care about this stuff.
I can't believe you and I have arrived at 20 minutes here. So what I want to do is maybe run through one big topic and question per sport. I got baseball, I got basketball. We've already touched on one baseball thing, but I've got another baseball thing. Baseball, basketball, hockey, and football. We good for that?
Yeah.
All right. So with baseball and the Tigers City Connects just came out, it feels like there is a creative process in this, and there is ideas and execution, and sometimes those are done differently or they turn out differently. But it does feel like we've got a lot of dark pants now. We've got a lot of similar themes. It feels like we've hit a creative snag with the City Connects. How do you see that plan going?
For people like us who A, care about uniforms and B, care about sports to begin with, we're looking at that in terms of the big picture of the City Connect program. But City Connect really, I don't know if they would acknowledge this or spell it out, Major League Baseball or Nike, but it's really designed to appeal to people who are not big baseball fans. It's supposed to broaden the fan base by getting, reaching people and appealing to people. You'll notice the Tigers City Connect uniform does not say Tigers on it anywhere. And that's true for most of these. It does not include the team name. It includes the city name because it's City Connect. And that's the idea, is that it appeals to your sense of civic pride, even if you're not a baseball fan. And so if you're a Detroit fan or just a Detroit resident and you see this and you think, Motor City, maybe I'll wear that. Maybe I'll buy that. And you may not care so much about the Tigers per se. And you certainly don't care about the overall City Connect program and whether so many teams have dark pants. But to me, that's why it fails as a uniform program, but I don't think it's really designed to be a uniform program. I think it's designed to be a lifestyle apparel program aimed mostly at people who aren't baseball fans.
2 words: selling merch, right? They're trying to move product and have their players be the mannequins for it. Okay, to basketball. And I think, I'm kind of going against your business model here. If there weren't that many jerseys to talk about, you wouldn't have as much content to put out there over 25 years. But in the NBA especially, there are way too many alternates. And my selling point on this is that when I tune into a game without looking at the score bug on the screen, I should instantly be able to know who are those 2 teams playing. And I kid you not, working in the industry I do, but I'm covering hockey. There's a basketball game on multiple screens. And I say, I don't even know who's playing there until I actually see up close and personal some names and faces. That's probably where we're overboard.
It's a problem in the NBA. And I hear what you were saying. I hear that specific thing that I turn on the TV and I don't know who's playing, or I walk into the bar and I look up at the TV and I don't know who's playing. I hear that a lot. And I should say, I would much rather have uniform quality than quantity. Like I would happily trade, if every uniform looks good and stayed that way, there'd still be plenty to write about for me. I assure you. I don't need a dumpster fire of bad uniforms just to write about. But with the NBA, it's too many, and the churn of it is too fast because the city editions, they replace every year. And that's how that's designed. And then the statement edition gets changed every couple of years. And the thing about that is, even if they hit upon a good one, and they don't always hit upon a good one,
right,
it's gone after a year.
Right.
And so even if you design something really good, you don't get to keep it. And so, I do think, again, the NBA has really been at the forefront, much more than the other Big Four pro leagues, of being more freewheeling with its aesthetics. trying to be more of a lifestyle brand than a sports brand. And that's why you see celebrities at the arena and that like the coverage of the NBA and even the focus on sneakers and streetwear and all that. The NBA has always been more into the lifestyle aspect of marketing itself. And I think that's what we see with all these freewheeling changes, the sort of carousel of uniform changes. But yeah, if you're just in it for the sports part, it can be a little disorienting.
All right, to the NHL, they're getting new jerseys next year, new fabricated jerseys by Fanatics. They're taking over that program. And they're also getting a new franchise. The Utah whatevers are going to exist. So this is kind of a twofold of expectations here. What do you expect the new Fanatics NHL sweaters to look like? And what do you think the NHL team in Utah is going to call themselves? 2 for 1 here.
First, I can say that I know it's a similar situation as in Major League Baseball. The same factory that has been making the jerseys and the on ice uniforms,
Montreal,
up in Montreal. That same factory, they were making them for Adidas. They were making them for Reebok before that. That same factory is still going to be making the NHL jerseys. Now, are the specs going to change? We'll find out. My understanding is that that's going to be rolled out soon by Fanatics. This will be Fanatics' first time as not just a merchandiser, but they get to control how the league looks. Their logo will be on the back of the jersey collar, where the Adidas logo has been and where the Reebok logo was before that. We'll find out. I can say, like, I've talked to the people at Fanatics, and they care deeply about getting this right, especially with they've gotten a lot of blowback, in my estimation, unfairly for the Major League Baseball fiasco. They understand that there's a lot at stake here for them to get this right.
I've heard the exact same thing.
Utah franchise, I would love to see something bee related, beehive, bumblebee, stingers, something along those lines, because Utah is the beehive state. I would love to see that.
I'm a big Yeti guy. And it's
you're going for the Yeti?
Yeah. And actually, I have a big thing, though. If it's Yetis, it's going to, as a broadcaster and somebody who's going to have to say that name, I'm going to always stumble on that because I'm a Utah Yeti. It's got the but if it's plural, it's going to be a problem for me. I don't know why. So
the Utes and the Yets,
right?
Or the Ute Yets or something like that.
Right. It all kind of works in there. All right. And then the last thing is the NFL, and this is not so much a uniform thing, but an appearance thing. And they recently approved Guardian caps to be worn if a player wants to during an actual NFL, I guess, regular season game and postseason game, if it comes down to that. Look, this is revolutionary, and I certainly support, player safety and all the technology advances. I don't know if the league is doing this to protect themselves and say, well, you could have been wearing this the entire time. I don't know how many players will actually take advantage of this, and not because they shouldn't. It's more because of, like I said, how it might look or how it might come across. How do you see the whole Guardian cap situation?
Right. And for people watching this who don't know, the Guardian cap is that padded accessory that goes over the top of a helmet. They've been mandatory for full contact NFL practices for most positions for a few years now. This season, or this preseason or offseason coming up, they'll be mandatory for all players in practices except, I think, punters, kickers, and quarterbacks.
You're right. Yep.
Yeah. And the real revolutionary thing is that players can now wear them in a game if they want to. And there are some high schools that do this. I know there's one in Minnesota. I forget the name of the school, but they wear, like, all their players wear Guardian caps during games. And I do think my first reaction when I heard this was, who's going to be the pioneer, like the player who kind of says, I'm safeguarding my brain, I'm taking my health and my family's future and all that, I'm going to wear this thing. And it seems like it would take a lot of courage to be that first guy doing that because of the sort of warrior mentality in the NFL. I have to say, when it was announced, I expected a lot of sort of ridicule and jeering and social media chatter of people saying, "Oh, why don't you wear a skirt while you're at it," or something along those lines. And it really didn't happen. I was surprised and kind of pleasantly surprised by how many people said what you just said, basically. I'm all for safety. If they want to wear it, go ahead and wear it. I think from a visual standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, the question is, how do they include team branding or logos? Because these caps are not smooth. They have sort of, little nodules of foam, and it's not a smooth, rounded surface.
You can't miss them, right? I mean, they stand out totally.
Absolutely. And there was something called the Pro Cap, which a few players, Steve Kelso and it was Mark Kelso and Steve Wallace. Mark Kelso of the Bills and Steve Wallace of the 49ers in the 1990s wore this. It was just sort of like a little padded thing that fit over the helmet, but it wasn't as big or bulky, and it didn't have these separate sort of segments of foam in it like the Guardian cap does. And yeah, I'm very interested to see how they can make these things look like it's part of the team's visual program.
I think the first player to do it might be somebody who is returning from a concussion maybe during the season. And to your point, I think it's the barrier of entry of who's going to do this first and what's going to be their story and how much flack are they going to get in return, which honestly should be none in real life.
It should be. But I think here's my prediction. I think it's not going to be one player. I think it's going to be a couple of players who decide together, hey, let's do this, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4. Let's announce together that we are all doing this, whether it's 4 guys on the same team or even on different teams, because players all talk to each other and, we're all in the union and everything. But that it'll be more than one player who announce that, and so that they basically form their own support system, and it's not one person isolated who has to be the pioneer.
Yeah. I just think I'll watch football and say, okay, that looks different. But I also understand what's going on here. And if that's the personal choice, and if it doesn't impact the game or the final product, who am I to really care that much? Like that somebody else is taking that as a priority. So, Paul, this has been awesome. I've always enjoyed your work. I said that, but I just want to say that as you kind of wind down here in the next couple of weeks, kind of a sad thing. I know you're not entirely going away. I know we will continue to see you. So, real quick, what will you be doing and where can we still find you? I know Uni Watch is continuing, no question about that. Where can we find you, though?
At Paul Lukas, that's PaulLukas.substack.com. Right now, that is still a Uni Watch Substack, which is distinct from my daily Uni Watch blog. I realize that's confusing. I do one feature-length piece a week there, but at the end of this month, at the end of May, that Substack will go on hiatus. I'll take at least a month off, and then sometime later this summer, it will be relaunched as a rebranded, non-uniform, non-sports sort of hub for my activities. And I will write a lot about the stuff I did back in the 90s about consumer culture, little details of things, picky little inconspicuous observations about the world that I obsess over. And that's, Uni Watch was always one aspect of that. And now I'm going back to sort of reclaiming the other aspects of it.
I appreciate your time. Let's keep in touch, Paul.
My pleasure.